Members, without objection, we will move to Assembly third reading to take up file item 122, Assembly Bill 379 by Assemblymember Schultz. Senator Arreguín, are you prepared?
Yes.
Secretary, please read.
Assembly Bill 379 by Assemblymember Schultz, enact relating to crimes.
Senator Arreguín, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to present Assembly Bill 379 on behalf of Assemblymember Schultz and Nguyen. AB 379 authorizes felony punishment for solicitation of any minor by an adult more than 3 years older than the minor, as well as a misdemeanor for loitering with the intent to purchase commercial sex. It also provides new tools for prosecutors, establishes a survivor support fund to aid victims, and establishes tougher penalties for those who deliberately look the other way on trafficking. And I just want to call attention to a few statistics. Thank you, Madam President, that were referenced in the analysis. First, California has the highest number of human trafficking incidents reported by the California Human Trafficking Hotline. And according to a Point Loma Nazarene University and University of San Diego study, in San Diego County alone, they estimated there were more than 3,500 victims who are trafficked each year in San Diego County, earning traffickers an estimated $810 million. And that those 16 years of age were commonly, unfortunately, impacted by human trafficking. I think this illustrates that this is a prevalent issue that impacts our entire state and that requires action. This bill also provides resources to community-based organizations who are serving victims of human trafficking. Together, these changes will help communities working to end trafficking and to protect our vulnerable youth. AB 379 builds on the work of the legislature over the last several years in partnership with victim advocates to protect victims of human trafficking, including our youth, and to begin changing California's laws to center victims. AB 379 went through an extensive process in the Assembly, which I believe made it a better, more effective bill aimed at enforcement of businesses and individuals engaged in human trafficking. Now, I know that we will hear some concerns today from senators on the floor about the bill. And I think these are legitimate issues that should be discussed. And I know the author is committed to continuing conversations with members to address these concerns if this bill moves forward. I specifically want to address the concern expressed about whether this bill would create a new deportable offense at a time of aggressive immigration enforcement throughout our state. Unfortunately, we are in a time when the recent actions of the federal administration make detaining and arresting people for no apparent reason standard practice. And as we've seen in Southern California, ICE agents have been stopping individuals on the street for no apparent reason, and that is why a federal court recently issued an order to stop this particular practice in response to litigation by our Attorney General. That is why the legislature took action over the last several months to approve over $100 million in legal aid to defend our residents from these outrageous actions. I think all of my colleagues know how serious my commitment is to protecting our immigrant communities. But I believe that this bill strikes a reasonable balance. In the end, it's a step towards justice for our youth and for victims of human trafficking. Once again, the creation of a new human trafficking vertical prosecution grant program, more resources for nonprofits helping victims, increased penalties and enforcement for businesses who do not post required notices and who do not report human trafficking to law enforcement. AB 379 passed by a bipartisan vote of 74-0 in the Assembly and is supported by several big city mayors, including the mayors of Sacramento, San Diego, Long Beach, San Jose, Fresno, and Bakersfield, in addition to support from the League of California Cities, the California District Attorneys Association, and State PORAC. SB 379 is a step towards justice, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote today.
Senators, I'm going to ask if you could take your conversations off the floor. It is getting too loud. We're going to start discussion with Senator Dr. Weber Pearson.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, human trafficking is a $150 billion global industry and one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises in the world. The FBI has ranked my area in San Diego as one of the 13 worst regions in the United States with up to 8,000 victims per year. The impact of sex trafficking on the Black community is profound. Black children represent 53% of all juvenile prostitution arrests. 40% of sex trafficking victims are identified as Black women. And when we consider studies showing that discrimination based on race and gender combined with poverty and marginalization increases the vulnerability for sexual exploitation, violence, and sex trafficking, we cannot ignore the fact that structural racism is once again at the root cause of the disparity of Black women and men in sex trafficking. And as a mother of 2 young boys, as a physician who has taken care of individuals who have been sexually trafficked, and as chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I recognize the urgency of the hour, that it is imperative that we come together to eradicate human trafficking at its root. And although I understand the intent of AB 379, it is disappointing that in our haste to push this bill through the legislative process, critical concerns were left unaddressed. I cannot stay silent about the serious implications this bill could have, particularly in reestablishing and broadening the crime of loitering. Members, loitering laws have a long and troubling history rooted in post-slavery Black codes and Jim Crow-era policies that were designed to surveil, control, and criminalize Black people just for existing. Though facially neutral, these laws have consistently been used to target individuals based on perceived presence or appearance rather than actual conduct. They rely on vague, subjective interpretations of behavior, giving law enforcement broad discretion to stop and arrest people, often in ways that reflect implicit and explicit bias and racism. AB 379 lacks a clear and objective definition of what constitutes loitering and offers no meaningful guardrails to prevent abuse or ensure accountability. It empowers law enforcement to act on perceived intent, which opens the door to discriminatory policing and racial profiling. It was for these reasons just 3 years ago the legislature approved and Governor Newsom signed SB 357, which repealed loitering offenses in an effort to address the disproportionate harm that loitering laws cause Black, brown, and LGBTQ+ communities. Those provisions gave law enforcement sweeping power to profile, target, and arrest people without meaningful oversight or accountability. AB 379 repeats those same mistakes and does so without offering clear definition, limits, or procedural protections. The irony is that this very bill meant to protect young Black children like my sons will also make them more vulnerable to racial profiling. And this issue of racial profiling is something that this state has tried to combat. And so it is very disheartening and disturbing that we are going back to a time that perception of something equals a crime. We are going back. Not other states, not other individuals, we are going back. And while I understand that we can't delay action to eradicate human trafficking, I urge this body to stand with those vulnerable Californians to amend in the very near future the loitering provisions that, if not fixed, will result in renewed discrimination, harassment, and criminalization of Californians who are already vulnerable and over-policed.
Thank you, Senator. I have next Senator Valladares.
Thank you, Madam President and colleagues. I rise today not just as a senator, but as a mom to a little girl and a Thea to 11 nieces and 2 great-nieces. When I think about AB 379, I don't think about statutes, I don't think about codes, I think about them. I think about what kind of world we're building for our girls. I think about what kind of protection we owe them. This bill is about making sure that the law matches our values. AB 379 increases the penalties for adults who attempt to buy sex from minors, specifically 16 and 17-year-old children. And frankly, it's an embarrassment that this isn't already the law. Right now, a grown man can walk away with an aggravated misdemeanor. That's not justice, and it sure as hell isn't enough. This bill changes that. It elevates the crime to a felony misdemeanor, holding the buyers accountable. It also creates a $1,000 fine, and those funds are going to go straight to the community-based organizations on the front lines helping our survivors heal. Let's be clear, though. These kids are not criminals. They are victims, trapped in cycles of abuse and coercion, manipulation, and often outright force. And it's time that the system stop treating them like anything less than children in need of protection. I've met the women leading these local nonprofits, like Zoe International in my district, mothers, survivors, counselors, who are all patching up pieces of trauma. They do it with heart, with grit, and not nearly enough support. This bill gives them more tools to continue that work. And I have to say, I'm tired of excuses. We should all be able to agree on this. There is no moral or rational argument against protecting children from being bought and sold for sex. If we can't draw a hard line on child sex trafficking, then what are we doing here? I want to be able to tell my daughter and every one of my nieces that we fought for them. That when we had the chance, we stood up and we said, not in our state, not to our girls, not to our children, not on our watch. Before I close my comments up here, though, I want to take a moment to thank two women who have shown true courage. First, the Emmy-winning senator from Bakersfield. She has been tireless on this issue, working behind the scenes, building coalitions, and always keeping the focus on victims. She's not in this for the spotlight. She's in it for kids. And I especially want to thank the Assemblywoman Maggie Crowell from Sacramento, who originally authored this bill. Her name was taken off of it, not because she backed down, quite the opposite. It was because she stood firm. She had the political courage, and she paid a political price for doing the right thing. But her values never wavered. It reminds me of a quote Ronald Reagan kept on his desk, first as governor of the state of California, and later as president of the United States. It's the same quote that I keep on my desk. There is no limit, permission to read?
Permission granted.
There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. That is the spirit of this bill. The spirit of the senator from Bakersfield, the Assemblywoman from Sacramento, and the kind of leadership we need more of in this building. And lastly, I'll say that if you are buying sex from a child for a 16 or a 17-year-old, I sure as hell hope that's a deportable offense. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Senator Grove, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, protecting children from being bought and sold for sex should not be that difficult. As my colleague mentioned, it's the #1 moneymaker for the criminal cartel, and it's the #1 criminal offense on our state attorney general's website. It shouldn't be that difficult, but it is. I introduced SB 14 and 1414, sex trafficking of children, and many of you in this chamber co-authored those measures. My good colleague from San Francisco was the one who put it over the top when it came, SB 14, selling children for sex, to make it a serious felony. In the Senate Public Safety Committee, and there's all this banter and conversation about how it became the bill of the century, not because of the policy itself, but because I couldn't control myself and I ran up on the dais and hugged my colleague from San Francisco. And then everybody thought, what is this bill about, that would happen? It met a different fate in the Assembly. SB 14, we all know that the Assembly Public Safety Committee killed the bill and the governor engaged. And when you talk about a piece of legislation where the most conservative legislator in the state could find favor with one of the most liberal legislators in the state from San Francisco and our governor and come together to pass a piece of legislation that would protect children from being sold for sex, that speaks volumes to me about the way we can work together to solve problems that desperately need to be solved. Later, we introduced SB 1414, again with our coalition survivors. Never been in that world, but the survivors were, thanks for addressing the sellers, but we have to go after the buyers, because when the buyers purchased us, it didn't matter. It was brutal. And they paid that money, and they felt like they were, able to do whatever they wanted. We went after the buyer portion with SB 1414, and we wanted to stop the negotiation process at the beginning of the negotiation. There's already laws on the books were brought forth when we introduced SB 1414 that if they, engaged with sex with a child, if they did this, it was a felony, it was under a separate code section. But the point is if somebody like the UC Davis person, a med student at UC Davis that one of our law enforcement partners gave us, negotiated a deal with a 14-year-old black girl. He's white, 35, UC Davis, and he's on the phone negotiating this deal with her. I want it stopped at that point. I don't want that child raped. I don't want anything to happen to that child. So the solicitation piece became our focus. We introduced that bill to protect all minor children from solicitation or being engaged in solicitation or the engagement of purchasing a child for sex. And again, amendments excluded 16 and 17-year-olds. I made the argument that in the state of California, you have to be 18 to be in a tanning bed. You have to be 21 to buy cigarettes. But you can be 16 and 17 and still be solicited by a grown man and it not be a felony. It was maximum 2 days in jail. That's just long enough to explain to your wife where you've been. We wanted a 1-year jail sentence. I just refresh your memory on the people that weren't here, but that's what happened in the last couple of years. And I just applaud AB379, which was introduced, and originally I signed on as a co-author, a principal co-author with Assemblywoman Maggie Carell. And while I'm grateful that we're finally at this point, I have to be honest, it's deeply disappointed that it's taken this long and it's been this hard to extend critical protections to 16 and 17-year-olds being bought and sold for sex. The trauma that we hear about from our survivors is stuff that it almost gives you PTSD when you have to read and think about all these things that happen to these young girls and boys. But everybody in this building knows that progress is incremental, and this bill is progress. California must take action and hold buyers accountable. We have to reduce demand. Even in some of the law enforcement videos that we watched, the perpetrator being arrested for selling the girls for sex right here on Stockton Avenue was screaming, "It's not me, it's not me, I wouldn't be out here if it wasn't for those people paying me money." That's the justification of their argument. And it's true, we have to reduce demand, and SB 379 does that. If there is a risk that you are going to go to jail, and if there is a risk that you're going to have to pay a $1,000 fine, the limit of that risk is reduced. Like, you're not going to take the risk instead of just getting off scot-free. We've got to take a bold stand, and that's why what exactly AB 379 does. This bill, moving forward today, because of the tireless, courageous, heartbreaking advocacy of survivors and survivor leaders. And I want to thank the author for listening to survivors and survivor leaders. They were very concerned about working not with a man, but just somebody that they didn't feel comfortable with at first, but he has gained their respect and their confidence through this process. Many of these women were trafficked as children. They've been part of the system. They were part of the welfare system. They were part of the foster care system, and they were trafficked as children. And they returned every year to battle after battle to advocate for the changes in the law. They've shared the most brutal stories imaginable, being beaten, raped, starved, degraded, sold, urinated on, defecated on, locked in a shower, only for people to come in and take their turn in a shower hour after hour, paying their money. We listened to all these stories, and they came here and they were vulnerable in hopes that one more child would not have to experience what they did. And through their pain, they also shared something else, stories of triumph, stories of healing, stories of restoration, standing tall and finding their purpose, going from victim to survivor to thriver. They testified before countless committees. They've faced down hostile amendments. They've walked into rooms filled with confusion, indifference, and sometimes direct opposition. But they persisted. The strength of their conviction, their grit, these women were the reason that this bill is moving forward. They're the reason that we're here, and I'd like to highlight just a few of them, of the survivor leaders that have been with us since the beginning. Jenna McKay, Odessa Perkins, Brianna Mosley Price, Ashley Fajan, Vanessa Russell, Sawan Vaden, Marjorie Saylor, Helen Taylor, Ashley Bryant, and Deborah Rush, just to name a few. There are so many others that walked into this building to share their story, to if not make an impact on your thought process for policy, but an impact on your heart. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to thank the original lead author of this bill, Assemblymember Maggie Carell. There's no one in this building with more prosecutorial experience when it comes to human trafficking. As a former federal prosecutor, she spent her career taking on traffickers, including leading the fight to take down Backpage. She knows the issue inside and out, and since the day that she told me she was introducing this bill, she has worked around the clock, both inside, outside, in the front lines, off the front lines, behind the scenes, never letting up, never backing down, even when she was removed as the author of this bill. She's shown what it means to lead with integrity, experience, and unwavering commitment, providing real leadership. Her leadership speaks for itself, a perfect representation of an old adage that my colleague just brought up: there's no limit to the amount of good you can do when you don't care who gets the results. The Assembly member is a powerful example to women everywhere. Never let politics, ego, misogyny stand in your way of your God-given purpose to protect those that need the protection the most. It's been a great honor to stand with her, with all of our supporters on this floor, with the survivors that made this moment possible, providing it gets off the floor. And I want to thank Maggie Carell for bringing this forward. My staff and I, we just couldn't do it again. It's like to hear these stories and then watch the disappointment and the things that happen in committees when these bills are pulled, died, or amended. It's hard. I mean, we can take it, but the people who have lived this life and don't understand why we can't get a simple conviction for the purchasing of a child for sex and prostitution, or soliciting a child for sex, or selling a child for sex, it's very difficult for I don't want to say the real world, but the outside of the building world to understand. I want to thank the governor again for rescuing SB 14, my colleague from San Francisco for getting it over the top on public safety on the Senate side, and then everybody here who co-authored these bills and that supports this bill today, so that we can try to put an end to this horrific, horrific crime. Respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Senator Richardson, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by stating unequivocally, full stop, crimes of prostitution and sex trafficking are an abomination and should not be tolerated, should be punished with great consequences. Just this year, in Section 90, Item 2720-0002-001 of Section 2.0 of the Budget Act of 2025, this body, many of you, we worked and we allocated funds to work against the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force. Likewise, I fully support AB 379 except for one provision, and that relates to loitering. According to California Penal Code 653.22, to loiter in a public place with the intent to commit prostitution is illegal, and I agree. The question is whether soliciting, whether asking is the same as committing. I think most minds would concur that they're different actions. After all, loitering may or may not include and involve an immediate criminal act. Should someone be charged with a misdemeanor for asking to engage in an illegal conduct? Should a person be charged with a misdemeanor and serve 6 months in jail for asking to engage in illegal conduct? Should someone be charged with a misdemeanor and pay a $1,000 fine for asking to participate in an illegal act? Should someone be arrested, impact their employment, and damage their record for the rest of their life for asking to participate in an illegal act? And should someone have barriers from then on be set against them of housing, public benefits, and other social supports for asking to engage in an illegal act? Should someone be charged with a misdemeanor if they solicit with a minor 3 years younger when a person pulls up to the car and they don't know the person is a minor 3 years younger than them? Should a person be charged with a misdemeanor that demonstrates the purpose of inducing, enticing, or soliciting? Should someone be charged with a misdemeanor for circling an area in a motor vehicle repeatedly? Who defines repeatedly? Is it twice you go around the block? Is it 3 times? Or is it 20? Should someone be charged with a misdemeanor for making unauthorized stops? How many stops? What's unauthorized? When I was on the Long Beach City Council, we used a local law, and it was called the Johns Law, and it was very effective. What it did was it didn't go against prostitutes who were going to be arrested and out 3 hours later. What it did was the person who committed the act, their car was impounded, and they were held in jail for 2 to 3 days. So that person then had to call, in most cases, their partner, whoever, hey, my car is impounded, I can't go to work on Monday. And do you know a street of Pacific Coast Highway in Long Beach, California, went from prostitution from one end to the other to no prostitution at all? Today, we don't have the Jones Act. Today, we are sanctioning a disturbing legislative process. As a member of this body, I was disturbed to learn that members were not allowed to submit and chairs were not allowed to accept amendments, a basic component of how we conduct our legislative business. Here today, we're choosing policy over people. This bill opens the door for subjectivity, racial profiling, and bias discretion, which all is also wrong. A crime of sex trafficking is wrong. Prostitution is wrong. Solicitation is also wrong. The question is whether loitering should be a crime and a misdemeanor. whether standing around should be a crime and a misdemeanor, whether driving around should be a crime and a misdemeanor, whether whistling, waving, should that be a crime and a misdemeanor. And if you don't believe me, I think some of you are learning, I like to refer to history. I will tell you 2 words, Emmett Till. A young black boy who was accused of whistling to a white woman, whistling, waving, whatever that might be. He was arrested, he was dragged, and he was horribly, horribly killed. Every city in our beautiful state is not the same. I work for a police station about 6 miles in its entirety, and there was a rule that a minority person should not go from one end to the city to the other without being stopped. That's California, people. That's where we still live. So AB379 of itself is spot on, and I commend the authors for their work and for addressing this very serious issue. But loitering is not. And I call on the authors to fix this bill, if it goes forward, and make it right. Because that may be your son, your grandson, your daughter who decides on a Friday night to drive up to Pacific Coast Highway and kind of laughingly seeing people engaging in illegal contact, solicit, say something, and then they're arrested and have a misdemeanor and serve 6 months in jail.
Senator Rubio, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Madam President, and ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. I do rise in support of AB 379 because I think that protecting victims of human trafficking is not only a moral obligation, it is a public safety imperative. And as I'm hearing everyone discuss this issue on the floor, I have to say it's a complicated issue because you can see both sides. You don't want any child harm, whether it is human trafficking side or those that are being racially profiled. I did hear the great senator from Long Beach that they attempted to offer amendments on this bill and they were not taken, and that the process perhaps was not perfect. But I have to offer another perspective because I know we've been pushing this bill for 3 years, so there's been so much debate going back and forth. For me, the deciding factor, in small part, was having conversations with our police officers back home. And I was really happy to see some of the numbers that our police department presented in terms of the victims that they saved. 1 year they had 54 young girls that they had saved from human trafficking. The following year it was 12, and I thought we were doing a great job in tackling this issue, and that we had now gone from 54 to 12. And what I learned is that it wasn't that we were doing better, is that the way the law was written, they were not stopping people. And those opportunities to vet people that are around our communities, especially around young ladies, was that opportunity. Once they stopped them and talked to them, oftentimes they found those little girls or little boys who they were able to save because they were able to stop and have that conversation with them. So when I think of those 42 kids, that's the difference. 1 year 54, the next year 12. That is 42 children that they didn't save because they weren't able to stop and ask questions. And again, I want to be sensitive to everything that everyone's saying. It is a very complicated issue because we want to be able to be sensitive to civil rights violations, profiling, but I also want to save our children. And given those numbers that our police department offered, it really just breaks my heart that we're not saving enough children. And so I hope that we continue to move forward with this bill, and I don't disagree if there's opportunities to fix that language about loitering. I hope that everyone sits down at the table. But I think that this bill takes thoughtful steps towards ensuring that we hold those human traffickers accountable, that we save children, that we send a clear and strong, decisive message that we will not tolerate those that violate our children. And again, this is an issue that I hope everyone understands. It's not an easy issue, and we've been debating this. Again, I know I was the original author along with the great senator from Bakersfield 3 years ago, so it wasn't something that just came up this year. We've been fighting this bill for 3 years now, and I believe the first year it wasn't successful. The second year, it was a lot of dialoguing, a lot of conversations that were quite intense. And so I know the work that already has gone into this bill, so it's not a last-minute bill without thought and consideration. But I also want to take a moment to thank the senator from Sacramento, Maggie Curl, the Assemblywoman, because it does take courage. Sometimes you're never going to please everyone, and you don't want to harm or disrespect anyone's thoughts and considerations. But once again, I feel that this is too important not to move forward. So I want to commend also the author who is now carrying this bill. But again, we want to make sure that those human traffickers are held accountable and that survivors are protected with the dignity and care that they deserve. I, too, had the opportunity to sit down with some of these victims that the senator from Bakersfield was just sharing, and they're pretty horrific. They are horrific. They're heartbreaking, and my heart really hurts when I think of the stories we heard together, the cries, the pleas for help, and that is why I would like to move forward with this bill, and that is why I stand in strong support of AB 379. Thank you.
Senator Gonzalez, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Madam President. And I rise today in support of AB 379 while absolutely and wholeheartedly understanding the concerns of my colleagues from the Black Caucus, as well as my seatmate. That's why in 2022, I actually supported SB 357, because I did feel that there needed to be checks and balances on law enforcement on this issue of loitering and the offense to rein in this unchecked power. However, AB 379 is an urgent issue in my community. North Long Beach is the second most frequented area in LA County for sex trafficking solicitation. 2 council members on the city council have addressed this, and they brought forward an agenda item. They're also talking about, we're a very unique city in Long Beach because our city health department, our mayor, our city council, our law enforcement, our city prosecutor, who I often connect with on these issues, and many nonprofits together are working tirelessly, even before this bill came forward, on outreach and awareness campaigns, encouraging victims to ensure that they come forward and access vital support services. And AB 379 will ensure that we focus on diversion court programs to help individuals on a path to recovery without additional barriers. In fact, Long Beach already offers counseling, trauma therapy, GED tutoring, tattoo removal, and court advocacy. But victim support, we know, is not enough. And AB 379, in my opinion, strikes the appropriate balance to protect our communities and victims while keeping individuals with the intent to purchase commercial sex to account. And this bill holds people accountable for their role in sustaining the trafficking industry while directing those trapped in it towards services, not incarceration, and ensuring that there are civil penalties for hotels and motels and businesses, which is the first ever. We know all the hotels and motels in our community that are also part of the problem. And again, I do understand the concerns from my colleagues, and I don't take those lightly, from the LGBTQ and the Black Caucus. And I believe that we need to find cleanup and a balance so that not just people are held to account, but also the cities and law enforcement are held to account as well. There should be data and reporting, and we should also reconcile the ugly historical understanding of vagrancy laws in the past that have targeted Black community members and now are targeting brown and LGBTQ members of our community. We need to do all the above. With that, I will say yes today to vote aye on this bill, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on additional legislation.
Thank you. Senator Ashby, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to reiterate a couple of points and then talk about several women who got us to this point. First of all, I think it's really important to note, I'd like to align myself with the comments made by the presiding officer earlier today, the senator from San Diego. I think AB 379 does a lot of good things and important things. I had the opportunity to work in the misdemeanor arraignment court as a public defender in this county in Sacramento for a couple years of my life, prior to the senator from San Francisco's bill that removed loitering. And it was a problem. Loitering enforcement is a problem. And I'll tell you why. Because people who live in communities that are identified as being places where loitering happens can get picked up for just being outside of their home. Or in my instance, I went to Sac High in Oak Park. You couldn't really hang out outside of the school because it was the designated zone for loitering, which means you literally had to be careful on your way to school, which I don't think is a fair rule or a fair law. In my experience, in my city, in the city that I represent, I think there needs to be some work done here on the loitering component of this bill. And I align, again, my comments with the chair of the Black Caucus, the doctor, good senator from San Diego on those points. On AB 379, separate from that, you know, there was a day that the now Assemblywoman representing the northern half of Sacramento County came to me and told me that she was going to run for this seat. And I knew from the moment that she said she would run for that seat that should she be successful, this is exactly the type of bill that we would all be voting on. There was no way that Maggie Krell was going to spend so much as one day in this building without addressing this issue. It is her life's work. And prior to that, of course, there were strong women in this House, the senator from Bakersfield, the senator from Baldwin Park, who moved the ball down the field, all in the hopes of coming alongside women who were being sex trafficked or victim, or working with the people who are working with those women and children to do everything we can from a government standpoint to provide resources and help. When the relatively new Assemblywoman used all of her will to get AB 379 as far as she could, another strong woman from Sacramento stepped in, Assemblymember Wynn, and carried Assemblymember Krell's work, the next leg of that lap. So as the senator for those two women, I'm really proud of them. I'm proud that they found a way to work together even when they didn't necessarily agree exactly. I'm proud that they both brought their incredible experiences in life to this bill. I'm proud that we get to vote on it today. I'm hopeful that there will be more work, particularly around the loitering component. But I rise today as a proud senator of two Assembly members who I get to represent and ask that AB 379 receive your aye vote.
Senator Weiner, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First of all, I want to say I feel like the senator from Bakersfield and I have been on a multi-year journey on this issue in the Public Safety Committee in particular. And I appreciate that the senator mentioned SB 14. There's been a lot of good work in this body and this legislature around human trafficking. First in the budget, where we've done more to support survivors. And then SB 14, which created the first new strike in California in probably 20 years, I think, for trafficking a minor. If you traffic a minor, it is now a strike. And that passed this body 40-0 unanimously. And so I'm proud of the work that's happened in this body, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for their work. I want to also just acknowledge our two lead assembly authors who have both in different ways dedicated their lives to public safety, and I am very grateful for their work. I also want to thank the survivors. Sitting in public, I'm in my 9th year in public safety, 9 years in a row. It's a lot. That is an intense committee. It is a committee about life and death. about victims and survivors, about people who are being subjected to potentially massive consequences. I always like to, whenever someone gets upset with me for a vote I cast on public safety, I always try to remind them, when we're writing the penal code, we're writing it for 40 million people. It's a lot of people with a massive range of behaviors. And we all take that very seriously, the members of that committee. And it's a hard, intense, and emotional committee. And one of the hardest parts is when we have survivors come and talk about what they went through and how it changed their life. It is so powerful and courageous when the survivors come forward. And I want to right here and now thank the survivors who advocate, not just on this bill, but on so many bills, by talking about the hardest thing that any human being could ever go through, particularly this kind of victimization. The solicitation piece of this bill, which has really taken up all the oxygen around the debate on this bill, that's what the public debate is about, soliciting a minor, with the amendment that was put in the assembly to say there has to be a 3-year age gap, so you couldn't have a high school senior getting, a felony for soliciting another high school senior, for example. That solicitation piece with the 3-year age gap is something that I support. And if that were the bill before us today, I wouldn't even be speaking now, probably. I would just be casting my aye vote. Unfortunately, this bill is 2 bills in 1. And that happens sometimes. I've been guilty from time to time of putting 2 bills into 1 bill. I really wish that this bill were not 2 bills in 1 and that it were separate, because I would like to be able to vote for the piece around soliciting a minor. That is something that I support. But unfortunately, bill number 2 in SB 379 creates a new loitering law. California. Colleagues, we should not be creating new loitering laws in the state of California in the year 2025. We have worked hard to get rid of loitering laws. And I want to read, permission to read?
Permission granted.
This is from, in 2020, the LGBTQ caucus and the Black caucus partnered to jointly ask Governor Newsom to grant a posthumous pardon to Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s lieutenants. He was a gay black man who was arrested in Pasadena for having sex in a car and was prosecuted and convicted. And we asked for him to be posthumously pardoned. Thank you to the governor. He pardoned him and then set up a process for other LGBTQ people to come forward to get pardons from some of these crimes targeting our community. And I want to read from what the governor wrote. Thank you for permission. Quote, in California and across the country, charges like vagrancy, loitering, and sodomy have been used to unjustly target lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. Law enforcement and prosecutors specifically targeted LGBTQ individuals, community spaces for criminal prosecution. Now, as a proudly LGBTQ allied state, California is turning the page on historic wrongs. I worked very hard for several years to pass AB 357, I guess a very similar bill number. I don't know how that happens sometimes. But SB 357, which repealed California's law of loitering with intent to engage in prostitution. And that was a law that had been horribly abused for many years. Because the problem with loitering laws is it's not about what you're doing. It's about how you look, how you're standing, how you're moving around, using words like beckoning. What does beckoning even mean? It means whatever a police officer thinks at that moment in time. So when we repealed loitering with intent to commit prostitution, people, usually women, and often trans women, were being arrested for, wearing your hair in a certain way with lots of makeup and a short skirt and high heels. that and standing in a place that sort of seemed like it might be a prostitution kind of place, that was enough to get you arrested. This law is different, and I understand, and I do appreciate that when the original author of the bill introduced it, it was to target purchasers, not sellers. So it's loitering with intent to purchase sex. And I appreciate that intent. However, the way that this is constructed, you don't have to actually be trying to purchase sex in order to get arrested. It's about, as mentioned before, driving your car around in circles, walking around in a certain way in an area that is prone to prostitution. That's enough to get you arrested. When I first came of age as a gay guy in the late 80s, around 1990, I still remember there was I was an undergrad, and there was a gay guy who was a grad student who sort of gave me like a tutorial, just telling me things to expect, how to, the good and the bad and the ugly about dating men, it's just all the ways how to move in the world as a gay man, what to avoid, risks. And one of the things he told me, and I will never, ever forget it, if you are just outside in a place where there are other gay guys, be on the lookout for the police, because they're there and they can just grab you. As a young gay, that scared the heck out of me, and it's something that's always stuck with me, and it's true. Loitering laws do not target everyone. They target people who are undesirable, perceived as undesirable. That's why they were first created during Jim Crow. It's why they were expanded as LGBTQ people decided not to be invisible anymore, or had to be invisible and had to be in certain dark areas because you couldn't be in public view. And loitering laws are a way to control. It's a way to control communities that are considered undesirable. I really, really want to vote for this bill. I want to vote for it. I support the solicitation piece, and I'm so appreciative of the work that went on in the Assembly to make this a better bill. But I just can't get there with loitering in there. I cannot support creating a new loitering crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Wahab, you are recognized at your desk.
Thank you. I first really just want to start out by saying that a lot of the conversation around human trafficking is not so simple. And I do believe that the majority of the public naturally want to protect our children. I'm in full agreement with that. But as the former chair of public safety, there's a lot you learn about policy and the impacts of policy. And I've talked to both of the chairs of public safety, both on the Senate side and the Assembly side. And one of the things I've always shared is the fact that the policies that come through public safety are not easy policies. They're incredibly complex. And one minor mistake could have a ripple effect for generations. And I often tell my constituents, in this particular committee, you could either help people significantly, victims, or you could potentially also entrap more individuals. And you have all heard from colleagues talking about everything from foster youth to LGBTQ youth to people of color, and how legislation and policy have historically impacted them negatively. And this bill is a complex bill. And we've heard from individuals talking about how they offered, including the authors, to address some of the concerns that were raised here. And how, because this bill is so complicated in some ways, and it gets chipped down to sound bites, and that's the reality of this bill. It is far deeper in regards to the impacts on the community. And yes, I think every single person in this building wants to protect our children, wants to protect survivors, and wants to hold those individuals accountable for being perpetrators. I'm in full agreement. I know our Republican colleagues are in full agreement, and our Democratic colleagues. And in this building, it has been literally over decade plus, if not 2 decades, where bills in this space have actually died. Year after year after year. And there's a number of bills I can read off. All of them have died and been held. And it's because of the fact that we have not had movement in this space on a real issue, an issue that actually affects almost every community. And, you know, many of us have big games coming up in our district, and we know that these issues will arise, even more prevalent. And this often happens in the shadows. It's not just in loitering spaces. It happens online, it happens in backroom alleys, it happens in hotels, it happens everywhere. This is one of the worst things of our society. And the reality is that we have a long way to go to address every facet of the discussion that has taken place for over a decade, from loitering to solicitation, prostitution, and trafficking. All different things. That is one of the biggest concerns. What are we talking about? The details of policy, especially in public safety, matter. And the reason why I'm going to support this bill, and I want to thank the author for bringing this forward, is because even though we have a long way to address all aspects of this issue area, we will be protecting and helping victims as well as punishing the perpetrators. And I do believe that the author and many other legislators in this building are committed to addressing some of the concerns that were raised by so many colleagues. And it has to be addressed because it's incredibly important to make sure that we do this right and we have true conversations in this space. So I respectfully ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion or debate, Senator Arreguín, you may close.
Thank you, colleagues, for, I think, the very robust and important discussion that we've had today about this bill. And I think the areas where it could be better. And I just want to address all the speakers that raised concerns about the loitering provision of this bill. I'll note that the language in the bill does say that, permission to read.
Without objection.
That it is unlawful for a person to loiter in any public place with the intent to purchase commercial sex. So it comes to intent. And it isn't that you can just drive around and not engage in any other subsequent behavior that demonstrates intent. Intent is the key part of this. But I want to also acknowledge that, and this was clearly illustrated in the analysis, and I want to thank the committee staff that did, I think, a really good job of going through all the different issues in the analysis, that there's a very ugly reality in the state and in this country of loitering laws and vagrancy laws being used to discriminate against people, our LGBTQ community, our African American community, and communities of color. So there's no doubt, sadly, that these laws have been used in a way that's been discriminatory, and we have to be very careful to make sure that they're not being used in a way that's discriminatory going forward. And so I know the author is committed to continue to engage, and I want to be part of that effort as well, as the chair of the Senate Public Safety Committee, engage in discussions about how we can make improvements to this bill to address that particular issue. But let's not lose sight of what this bill also does, which is it provides new tools to prosecutors. It establishes a survivor support fund to aid victims. It establishes tougher penalties for those businesses that deliberately look the other way on trafficking. And also the solicitation piece, I think, provides greater tools for prosecutors to hold Johns accountable who are trafficking kids and harming kids in our communities. So at the end of the day, this is about protecting kids and victims of human trafficking and addressing the increase of the exploitation of minors and sex trafficking on our streets in California. And I just want to briefly acknowledge that this passed with a bipartisan vote in the Assembly of 74-0 and has the support of mayors from the cities of Long Beach, San Jose, San Diego, Sacramento, as well as the mayors of Bakersfield, Fresno, and Riverside, League of California Cities, the California District Attorneys Association, State PORAC, and victim support groups all support this bill. This is a step forward for justice, but we know there's more work to do, and I'm once again committed, as I know the author is, to engage in those conversations to address the legitimate concerns that have been expressed today. But this is a step forward to provide justice and to protect victims of human trafficking. And with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Alvarado Gil. Aye. Archuleta. Aye. Adeguin. Aye. Ashby. Aye. Becker. Aye. Blakespear. Aye. Cabaldon. No. Caballero. Aye. Cervantes. Choi. Aye. Cortezi. Aye. Daly. Aye. Durazo. Aye. Gonzalez. Aye. Grayson. Aye. Grove. Aye. Hurtado. Aye. Jones. Aye. Laird. Aye. Limon. McGuire. Aye. McNerney. Aye. Menjivar. Aye. Nilo. Aye. Ochoa Bog. Aye. Padilla. Aye. Perez. Aye. Reyes. Richardson. Rubio. Aye. Sillarto. Aye. Smallwood Cuevas. Stern. Aye. Strickland. Aye. Umbert. Aye. Valadares. Aye. Wahab. Aye. Weber Pearson. Weiner.
Secretary, please call the absent members.
Cervantes. Aye. Limon. Reyes. Richardson. Smallwood Cuevas. Weber Pearson. Weiner. Weiner, no.
Ayes 33, noes 2. That measure passes.